Okay, so hi everyone, welcome to Exploring Climate Psychology, so an eco-anxiety workshop, and welcome to the Canny Climate Action Week. Before we kick off, we'll just big thank you to our major sponsors, so University of Tasmania and Leticia Global. A little bit of information on how you can join Canny. If you're not already a member, please do join. And we've actually just recently created a volunteer I guess donation, if you will, when you do join. So if you can have a look at the membership, and we are run by volunteers, and any, I guess, additional investment that can be made from our membership is welcome, just to obviously keep us operationally sustainable. As well, it's a lot of work done by volunteers, but to support that we do need funds just to keep our systems and operations going. So we do welcome your support, and we very much thank the support of our sponsors. So thank you to UTAS and Leticia Global, and I'll hand over to Leticia.
Thank you, Emily, and thank you, Katie. I'm just going to share my slides. Can you hear them? Can you see them? Excuse me.
Yeah, perfect.
Fantastic. So good morning from Spain. Here is 8 p.m., 8 a.m., excuse me. There is 8 p.m., right? So my name is Leticia. I'm a psychologist. I work at MindPlace Center. That is a center where we do multilingual psychotherapy, psychiatry, and coaching in Spain with different international institutions, universities and organizations. But I also work as a professor at IE University, a business school in Madrid, Syracuse University from New York, and sometimes I teach also with the University of Minnesota in the States. Today we are going to talk together about climate psychology and also about eco-anxiety. These are topics that normally I used to share in a separated way, but today we are going to see them together. I think it's interesting because we can see how we can do it better. How we can motivate behavior change in a collective way, but also how we can take care of our mental health in an individual way. So basically, what we are going to see today is what is climate psychology, its main issues of the study. Probably some of you already know about it, you're already familiar with it, but I'm just going to summarize it a bit. We're also going to talk about behavior change. It's going to be more related to psychology itself, different theories to understand how we change behavior and how do we maintain the change, and also the main challenges that we have when we want to build sustainable behaviors and why it's so difficult to motivate that change. And finally, we are going to talk about eco-anxiety, what it is, and different coping mechanisms, and different ideas to heal and to feel better. You can just interrupt me if you have any doubt, question, you can write on the chat, or at the end, we're going to have some time for questions and to discuss whatever you want to say or whatever you want to ask me. You can all see how I'm passing my slides, right? Okay, so what is climate psychology? Climate psychology is concerned with emotions and the social and mental processes that has contributed to the ecological and climate crisis and our responses and processes of adaptation to it. It's related to how climate change, how the impact on the environment is affecting our well-being and our mental health. And when I'm saying mental health, I could mean mental health or physical health because they are super connected. And when we talk about also how it affects our mental health, we can talk about different areas. We can talk about how climate change affects our mental health in an indirect way. Even if you are not very concerned about it, even if you don't know about it, because it is going to impact our mental health due to the quality of the air, the quality of the products that we eat, and everything is going to affect our physical and mental health. But we also talk about a more direct effect on our mental health. For example, creating activism fatigue, compassion fatigue, and eco-anxiety. When we talk about climate psychology, that is a field that has been growing in the last years, we can see that it's going to study our cognition, our patterns of thinking, our patterns of understanding the environment, our relationship with the environment, our relationship with other animals. Also, our cognitive biases that we all have, are defensive mechanisms. That is a very psychodynamic term that is very similar to cognitive biases. Is how sometimes we tend to deny things, to over-rationalize things, to activate self-serving biases as well, or group-serving bias, to excuse certain behaviors or to not take action. This field is going to study all these cognitive biases and the defensive mechanisms that we use when we just want to dissociate ourselves from the issue, or when it's difficult for us to take action. It's also going to study emotions, different emotions that they are going to appear. For example, emotions like eco-anxiety, obviously, anger, frustration, also positive emotions as hope, joy, sense of belongingness when we are together in, for example, places like this place or in this kind of sessions. So it's going to study more difficult and easier emotions as well. This field also studies our behavior. I mean, how do we change our behavior? How do we build new behaviors? But especially what we are going to talk about today, how we can maintain them. Because it's very common to see how when we talk about climate change, when we talk about the impact we have on the environment, there are people that they change their behaviors, but the thing is that they change it just for a while. It's difficult to maintain the change. It's difficult to make it sustainable. And that's why this field, climate psychology, is going to put a lot of weight on how we can maintain behavior change. And finally, it's going to talk about also self-actualization, the last step in the pyramid of Maslow, if you know about it, with the hierarchy of needs, talking about how important it is to also associate our sustainable behaviors with our capacity to grow, to be resilient, and also to feel congruent with our values and congruent with our own identity. How does it take action? I have been telling you how it studies our behaviors, our cognition, blah, blah. But what else? I mean, after the diagnosis, after the research, after the assessment, how can we take action? Well, from climate psychology, we can take action creating more awareness, promoting education about how these circumstances with the environment, they are going to affect our mental health, our physical health, the mental health of others, why it's difficult for us to change. It's also going to work a lot on validating suffering and mitigating the cognitive dissonance and seeing how we can deal with difficult emotions. This approach is going to be more focused on carefrontation than confrontation, how we can take care of our difficult emotions, how we can take care of our cognitive dissonance as well. And from that kind of compassion, that's why you have this title today for this talk, how from compassion we can build new behaviors and we can maintain them. And finally, as I was telling you, behavior change. So basically, this is what we are going to do from climate psychology, to study cognition, emotion, behavior, growth, self-actualization, and we're going to do it from cultivating awareness, promoting education, validating suffering, and finally, encouraging behavior change. But before that, we need to go a bit back in time to understand better the roots of behavior change. How do we change our behavior? And here I wanted to share with you the theory from Ivan Pavlov's, probably you all know about it, the Pavlov's dog, and the theory about classical conditioning. Classical conditioning is the main theory that we use in behavioral psychology to understand how we create new behaviors. It's about the association of stimuli. For example, how we associate unconditional neutral stimulus with unconditional stimulus, we create responses, and finally we condition all of it. For those of you who doesn't know about Pavlov's dog, it was an experiment in which the researcher was giving, every time that was ringing a bell, the dog was receiving food. There was a moment in which even if the dog was not receiving food, just ringing the bell was creating salivation in the dog. And it's this idea of how we create associations, the same idea that when maybe you go to a place that maybe it's not like super special or super beautiful, but maybe you had a fantastic experience there and you are going to feel lots of positive emotions, or the opposite as well, because you have been creating this association. If we think more about our health, we can see it with COVID, for example. With COVID, I don't know there in New Zealand or from where you are connected, Australia or different parts of the world, but here in Spain, I mean, COVID affected us a lot, and we had lots of different measures during some years, especially 1.5 years after COVID. And for example, all of us, we were wearing the mask when we were in public transport or in places that they were very crowded. It was a new behavior, right? We had to create a new behavior. Why did it happen? Because there are things that they are like that per se. I mean, there are unconditional stimulus, like for example, to be in danger, that they are going to create an unconditional response of protecting ourselves. So if we add to this unconditioned stimulus of being in danger, the idea of crowding places or public transport, we are going to create the response of protecting ourselves, for example, wearing the mask. And this is the first issue that we have when we think about behavior change for sustainability. Sometimes we have a kind of lack of immediate awareness of the danger. We are not as aware of what's going on here. We are not as aware of the danger. We cannot see the consequences immediately of climate change and the problems in the environment. This is the first issue that we have when we want to build more sustainable behaviors, but it's also the first challenge. How can we create the need of changing it? How can we create that need? If it's not as obvious, if it's more difficult to create association, how we can do it from classical conditioning. Later, I'm going to try to respond to this question. But as I was telling you, the issue here is not just to create behavior change, it's also to maintain behavior change. I was telling you about classical conditioning as one of the main theories to understand the origin of behavior, but the other theory to understand the maintenance of behavior is operant conditioning from Skinner. Is the idea that all behaviors that they are going to be reinforced, they are going to last longer, and all behaviors that they are going to be punished, they are going to last less time. It's the idea that every time that there is a trigger and we have certain thoughts and feelings and we behave in a certain way and this behavior is reinforced, the same time we are we are facing the same trigger, we are going to respond in the same way. I mean, how every time we reinforce what we are doing, we are going to create maintenance of the behavior. A very good example of it is everything related to social media. For example, why it's so addictive? Because it's constantly creating reinforcement, you know, it's constantly creating that kind of reinforcement. In fact, a kind of intermittent reinforcement. And this is the second issue that we have when we want to build sustainable behaviors. Sometimes we have a kind of lack of immediate reinforces. Why? Because when we are more sustainable, it's a thing that we do thinking about the long term, and we're going to see long-term results. That is one of the other issues that we have. It's more difficult not just to create change, but also to maintain change. Because on the one hand, the lack of awareness about the immediate need to change, and on the other hand, the lack of immediate reinforces. If this is a second issue, here we have the second challenge as well. How can we reinforce behavior change in the short term? What can we do to create this reinforcement and to maintain behavior change? I hope you are thinking about these questions, how you can create this kind of classical conditioning, how we can create a conditioning between changing our behaviors and a positive consequence, and also how we can create reinforces, how we can reinforce our behavior change. But this is not everything we are going to see. Also, when we think about individual well-being, we can think also about why don't we change? If I was telling you before, hey, but we know that climate change impacts our emotional health, impacts our physical health, impacts our well-being. So if we don't do it just for the environment, if we don't do it just for other animals, why don't we do it for ourselves? It's quite difficult as well. I mean, we have this lack of awareness, we have this lack of immediate reinforces, but it's also a very big leap. I like to take this model from the University of Minnesota of human well-being, explaining that our well-being, both of them, I mean, physical and mental well-being, but maybe focusing a bit more on mental health. It has a part that is individual, that maybe it depends on, let's imagine, it depends on our personality traits, our genes, our coping mechanisms, things that they happened to us in the past. But another part of our mental health is going to depend on our social network. Here we have our families, friends, schools, universities, organizations. But our mental health, it also depends on our society. I mean, the country where we live, the part of the world where we live, the conflicts that they are taking place there right now, the degree of confrontation, the way of argue with other people. And finally, it's going to depend on the environment as well. As I was telling you, an environment that is cleaner, an environment with fresh air, an environment that is nice. And as you can see here, that the environment is going to affect their individual well-being as well. And this is the third challenge. How can we create steps or like little stairs instead of challenging and frustrating leaps? This is another thing that we're going to see as well. If you have any doubt, question, if any of you want to add anything, just let me know, or you can just put it on the chat, okay? Here I came with some ideas of how we can create these compassionate steps for motivating action. Probably there are more. These are just some ideas that I'm going to share with you today, but feel free to share if you have other ideas or anything like that. We need to go, as I was telling you, step by step. It's difficult sometimes to tell people that you need to change your behavior directly because the environment is affecting your mental health. Why not to create these steps and these little like stairs? If we think about the individual part, one of the things we can do from here is to validate suffering, to promote self-care and reduce guilt. How can we do it? For example, we can do it with psychoeducation about eco-anxiety, with education related to mental health and how the environment affects our mental health. Not just the environment, also the feeling of being congruent with our values, the feeling of act in a way that is congruent with what I feel, what I think, my identity, that is going to reinforce our mental health for sure. If you think about it in general, when we tend to confront people, they are going to respond from a kind of from defensiveness. To criticism, in general, human beings will respond with defensiveness. These are the two responses that they always come together. So it's easier sometimes to approach it from carefrontation. As I was telling you, instead of confrontation, carefrontation. Explaining people how behavior, how climate change is affecting their mental health, explaining them how we can change it, explaining how maybe they had a kind of lack of education about it. We all did, in the same way we had it about mental health as well, or emotional intelligence. So explaining how we all have been creating associations with buying lots of products, that you are also vulnerable to the environment, that you're also vulnerable to technology, you're also vulnerable to, very big groups of research that they are trying to create to make you buy more products and things like that. This would be, in my opinion, the first step, trying to promote self-care, trying to reduce guilt, and doing it from psychoeducation about eco-anxiety, about behavior change, about our mental health, trying to do it from carefrontation, as I was telling you. The second step that we could take is to create immediate reinforcers. As I was telling you, one of the main issues we have to create sustainable behaviors is that the reinforcement is not immediate. There is a long-term result. And that is great. I mean, in general, everything that is important in life, it comes in the long term. The issue here is that it's more difficult to create behavior change when we don't have immediate reinforcers. How can we create immediate reinforcers? Well, there are lots of things we can do, or we can help other organizations to do. For example, creating challenges, creating rewards with verbal reinforcement. we know that we don't do it. We know that we are not here today just to take it like a game or things like that. But it's important to create these immediate reinforcers because they are going to motivate for action. The second thing that we can do is to focus on society. And here it's important to create a sense of identity, a sense of belongingness, how we can create a sense of being on the same page, being all together. One of the things that it creates more behavior change is the idea of the identity. And again, I'm going to think about social media just because they have positives and negatives, but for sure they are very good creating behavior change and maintaining it. And one of the things that they do, if you think about it, is to create identities. To create the identity of, if you do this type of things, or if you buy this type of products, you are in this group of people, or you have that identity. That is a thing that is very powerful for all of us as human beings, because at the end of the day, we are social animals, and to feel part of the group, to feel that the group is including you as part of them, to feel that you have a shared identity is going to motivate for change as well. So to create supportive communities, to create that kind of common identity, it's going to help us to maintain the behavior change longer as well. So as I was telling you, doing it from the individual well-being, trying to promote self-care, trying to promote it from carefrontation, trying to help people to understand their lack of education, their lack of awareness. Again, how vulnerable we are all of us, to buy products, to be doing certain things, to sometimes to travel in a way that is not very meaningful just because it's cheap or you have free time or things like that. So create that kind of awareness for confrontation, create these immediate reinforcers, create this sense of identity, this sense of belongingness and community, and finally, creating this real and sustainable change together to try to maintain it and to try also to savor positive emotions and the positive consequences of being congruent with who you are. As you can see here, this is how I like to represent it, how we can go from challenging and for a frustrating leap. I think that sometimes we see very ambitious, I think that sometimes we see quite difficult to get, to pragmatic and compassionate steps for motivating action. And here you have, Katie has my slides as well, so you are free to share them with the group if you think it's interesting, and you can think how you can also implement these little steps or these stairs, or you can create yours. You can create also your way to create behavior change. But in my opinion, we need to do it in a way that is going to be step by step and that is pragmatic and that is realistic, because people, they are going to feel less frustration. We have been talking about how we can create behavior change, how we can create more sustainable changes, and how we can do it from a collective aspect, how we can do it better, all of us together. But I also wanted to share with you today a bit about things that they affect our individual mental health. I think that is called eco-anxiety. As you can see here, it's a term that is recognized by the APA, the American Psychology Association, that describe, in fact, I think is going to be in the next DSM manual, the manual that we have for mental disorders. They are going to include it as well. I think that it's quite sad on the one hand, but on the other, it's very interesting and it's great because it's a way to recognize and validate this feeling and create awareness about it. The American Psychology Association describes eco-anxiety as this chronic fear of environment catalysm that comes from observing the impact on climate change and also our concerns and worries about the future and the future of of next generations. It's the idea that when we are exposed to climate change, to all these issues, how it's going to affect us. As I was telling you, it can affect us in an indirect way. Maybe we don't know about it, or in a very direct way, because it can create a kind of activism fatigue. If we think about it, I really like to describe eco-anxiety as a response of stress, anxiety, at the end of the day, as a state of alert. Like it could be another type of emotional issues like generalized anxiety disorder or phobias or anything like that. It's just to be in a kind of this state of alarm or alert. Renee, that she's a psychologist expert on climate psychology, probably you can find her research on PubMed, or also you can see some TED Talks that she has. In my opinion, she does a very interesting job describing eco-anxiety and climate psychology. She's going to describe it not just as a state of alarm or alert, but also a kind of environmental melancholia, combined with a sense of loss and paralyzing hopelessness. Powerlessness, excuse me. So creating this kind of hopelessness, creating this idea that we cannot change anything, that is not enough what we are doing. And here we can go back to what I was telling you before about creating little steps. It's true that it's going to be frustrating for all of us to try to create a very big change from today to tomorrow. It's going to be very, very difficult. Yeah, so it's interesting how we can think about it, that when we think about this big leap, we are going to feel more hopelessness. But when we think about how we can take little steps, we can feel more empowered as well. When we also think about the term eco-anxiety, as you can see here, we are going to see that anxiety is one of the key symptoms, but people, they are going to experience others as well. This is very different for everyone because we have individual differences, and there are people that they tend to manifest stress or anxiety in a more notorious way, and other people, maybe they are going to somatize the issue with physical symptoms and things like that. But what we know from research is that people that they suffer from eco-anxiety, in general, they are also going to suffer from fear, anger, exhaustion, hopelessness, feeling of loss, even sometimes phobia. And it's interesting how Lisa Van Susteren describes it as a kind of pre-traumatic stress disorder. I found it very interesting. Probably you all know about PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, but to describe it as a kind of pre-traumatic stress disorder. I think it's interesting also when we think about it for prevention. In psychology, like in all health sciences, sometimes we focus a lot on intervention, on how to repair or help with things that they are damaged, but we know every day more that it's super important to work on prevention, how we can help to prevent certain issues. And we know that this eco-anxiety could be a kind of form of pre-traumatic stress disorder. It's a way to create more sense of alarm, alert. And when we are more alert, in general, we're going to be also more irritable, and we are going to be more angry with other people, and we are going to react in a more uncomfortable way with others. And that is going to create also a kind of climate, a kind of environment of tension, and an environment of distress and anger. So as I was telling you, I think it's interesting to observe how important it is as a pre-traumatic stress disorder, as a way to create prevention. When I started to see about climate psychology, I thought, and I mean like a year ago, not a very big time ago, but I thought, oh, are there validated interventions for it? Do we have enough science? I have to let you know that we don't have a lot of science, but we have science about it. In fact, we have validated interventions. Validated interventions that in general, they have different ingredients, different components, ingredients that you can see here. Like, for example, the idea of creating resiliency, optimism, hope, trying to work with art therapy, expression of distress, also finding social connection and social support, encouraging to take action, and connecting with nature. I think that I'm going to explain later. There is research about it, and I think it's interesting because these are little things, little pills or steps that we can take, and we can help our communities to heal eco-anxiety doing these kind of things. But there is a thing that when thinking about, hey, from my clients, I was thinking, how can I, because I have lots of clients that they are very young, that they are in college, and they are very concerned about the environment and experiencing eco-anxiety. I'm always thinking about creating formulas that they can remember, because sometimes to explain them all of this, it's interesting, it's great, it's science, but when they are suffering for their minds, it's going to be difficult to remember it. You know, their brain is not going to access to, hey, let's think about all the research that Leticia told me. No, sometimes it's easier to think about little formulas with acronyms. And I decided to work with this one that I just created from vera, like aloe vera, the plant, a plant that is very resilient, and a plant that it has benefits for the environment and for us as human beings, you know? So it's a kind of win-win. And with Vera, it's an acronym that we can use: V of verify, E of embrace, R of regulate, and A of act or taking action. I'm just explaining you a bit better what it is. With V, verify, validate your suffering. I mean, it's normal that you are worried about it. We cannot just be neglecting the emotion. We cannot just be neglecting your worries or thinking that you are too dramatic or things like that. You feel what you feel, and it's great and it's right. And even more, the majority of emotions, they are informative. They inform us about possible dangers, issues that they are happening. They try to put us in a safe place. So validating our suffering, assuming that it's true, that it's a real issue, this issue, but also trying to combine it with education and a bit of research. For example, research and information about which are the industries that they are impacting more climate change, you know, because when we have more information, we are going to feel always more empowered. So V of verify, it means verify, validating your feelings, validating that it's a real issue, but also going to find good information, going to find good research, and trying to educate yourself on this issue, because more education you have, more information you have, better you're going to face it. With the E of embrace, the acceptance of these emotions. It's not just enough with creating, validating them and saying, okay, I'm suffering. No, we also need to accept the stress, accept emotions as information, as I was telling you, and embrace them, and maybe to practice practices of self-compassion and different practices to accept that they are going to be here and not be fighting against them. Because to be honest, as I was telling you, sometimes we don't create change, we don't make real change from, we don't create sustainable behaviors because we don't want to face difficult emotions. It's easier to fight against them, or it's easier to just avoid them. So with the E, is this E of embrace this stress, these emotions, accepting them as information, and maybe, as I was telling you, also practicing self-compassion. With the R of regulate, with this practice of self-compassion, but also assuming the lack of control, assuming what it's under your control and what's not under your control. Here I tend to explain to my clients and the students that we all have a locus of control. There are people that they have a very internal locus of control, that they assume that everything depends on them. If they are positive, internal locus of control as a complete external locus of control, because 99% of things, they don't depend just on us. You know, there are things that we can do, but there are things that we don't have the full control about them. And that is a thing that we need to accept as well when we are talking about creating sustainable behaviors and eco-anxiety, or when we are in activism as well, that we can do lots of things, but there are going to be people with their defensive mechanisms, their cognitive biases. It doesn't mean resignation, not at all. It means to put there the information, to try to do it from confrontation, as I was telling you before. As you can see, it's a word that I love. And how we can create these little reinforcements and things like that. But always assuming that we don't have the full control about the situation. And there is a moment in which we just can just let it go, when we don't have the full control of the situation. And finally, with the A of taking action, you know, taking action, creating sustainable behaviors to prevent compassion or activism fatigue, and also taking action, cultivating hedonic well-being and eudaimonic well-being. For those of you who doesn't know what it is, hedonic and eudaimonic well-being, they are concepts that they come from ancient Greece, from the Greek philosophy, but that they are very known in, for example, positive psychology or all these fields. They are the idea that we'll have two types of wellness or well-being. Hedonic well-being, that they are the little positive emotions that we feel in daily life, and eudaimonic well-being, that is more related to sense of meaning. When we feel that we have a meaningful life, when we feel, as I was telling you before, congruent with our values. So we can help people to create this behavior change, cultivating hedonic and eudaimonic well-being as well. How can we take action from the last part of Vera, from the A? We can take action creating things that they are going to create as joy as well in the short term, and things that maybe they are more difficult, but they create a sense of congruence with our values and a sense of identity and a sense of meaning. This sense of meaning and congruence with our values and with hedonic well-being, for example, because we know that more time we spend in green and blue spaces, better we feel. There is a lot of research about it as well. Just for your curiosity, I will let you know that green spaces, they have even more impact than blue spaces. What we know is that when we are in green spaces, they are going to impact us more. It's a generalization. Probably there are individual differences, but just to let you know. That's why sometimes when we want to create behavior change with our students or with different groups of people, it's interesting to do activities in nature. And with nature, I don't mean to take a plane and go to another part of the world or things like that. No, it could be just in the place where we are. When we can make some activities, for example, there is an activity that I love doing with the students that is called Mindful Mountain. That is that you go with your students to the mountain and there you practice mindfulness, but it could be any other, you know. In the moment you are talking about behavior change, in the moment you are talking about more sustainable behaviors, and you are doing it in green or blue spaces, when you're doing it in the nature, that's going to create this kind of conditioning as well, and it's going to create this kind of immediate well-being. So this is another idea that we have to create behavior change, but also to take care of our own mental health and to reduce our eco-anxiety. So as I was telling you, to summarize, here you can see again with Vera, V of verify and validate, E of embrace stress, R of regulate your control and lack of control, both of them, what I can do and what is out of my control, and A of take action for your well-being and the well-being of the planet. And that's everything I have for you today. So I think that right now we can open space to questions or comments or anything you want to share or to ask me. And you have my contact there as well, whatever you need. Thank you.
Hi, Leticia. I'm CJ. I'm jumping in for Katie, who you saw had some microphone problems earlier. Thank you so much for that presentation. That was really wonderful. And I hope that we'll get some really, I mean, you gave us so much to think about, so I'm sure people are processing. But if anyone has questions, I'd encourage you to drop them in the chat. It was super great. I know there's a couple questions that I thought I could ask if anyone wants to take a beat, but I'd encourage anyone, if you want to sort of speak up, we're a small group. We can do the raise hand function if anyone wants to talk. We'll manage that. But yeah, really wonderful. Wanted to say thank you. And maybe kick us off with a question if that's all right. So one of the questions we had was, so you mentioned there's sort of those helpful acronyms. Would you be able to point, so in addition to that, are there like some simple practical tools that you would encourage us in terms of supporting student emotional well-being with respect to that eco anxiety? I know there's some key takeaways, a lot of people working with students directly here.
Yes, I mean, this acronym is quite general, but if we think, for example, about more practical ways to do it, there are resources that I will recommend you from, I'm going to put it on the chat so you can all see it, okay? From Christine Neff, that she's an expert on self-compassion. And if you go to her website, for example, you can find there lots of practices and audios and things that sometimes I share with my students and clients, and that, in my opinion, they are very interesting. So these are practical, not just meditations, but also exercises about how we talk to ourselves, how we talk about our problems, things like that. Other activities I was telling you, probably I would combine these with activities in nature and explaining this kind of lack of control and thinking. There are things we cannot control, there are things that we cannot change, but from this space in which we are connected with nature, they are the little things that we can change, you know? Or for example, when they are traveling, and I think that sometimes it's very ambitious to say that we should travel less, because it's difficult for a lot of people, and especially when I have lots of students that they are studying abroad. But maybe to think about little behaviors that we can change and how they have an impact in the long term, that is very useful as well. So I would combine both, you know, the thing that is more related to action and things that they are under the control with the practice of self-compassion.
Thank you so much. That's a great resource. I will be Googling it. I am often surprised at how often we talk about feelings in this work. And so recognizing that is awesome. I am wondering if you're able to share in your experience. We've got a lot of people who are working with students here, but also a lot of people who are joining CANI and participating in CANI because they want to take action themselves as a way of managing this. But I'm wondering if in your work you might be able to share some perspectives or some differences in how you've seen this eco-anxiety and sort of propulsion or sort of drive to change and take action, and if it's different in how you see it with students and also how you see it with sort of practitioners and the sort of international education practitioners.
Yeah, I think that here there are two things. I mean, cross-cultural differences and generational differences as well. When I mean about cross-cultural differences, it's true that, for example, here in Spain, to be honest, kind of classical Spanish universities or organizations, it's surprising how little we talk about this issue, you know, even if we know it has a real impact. As I was telling you, it's not just we should change our behavior for the environment, but also because it's impacting ourselves. For example, in other international universities or in international education, maybe we talk more about this issue, but in my opinion, not as much either. I mean, not in lots of classes or courses we put it in our syllabus, you know, we don't put direct activities. When it's related to young people, I mean, with this, about the students, I think there are generational differences and they are cross-cultural. And it's a thing that I think we can be optimistic about it as well, that even considering everything that is happening right now around the world, and especially in Europe, if we consider the different conflicts and wars, even if they could have their attention more on this kind of conflicts, I can see how they are talking much more about sustainability and how they try to change their eating habits and things like that. Maybe the main issue or the main challenge we face in international education, in my opinion, it's how to reduce the impact of traveling, creating maybe more meaningful ways of traveling and things like that. Because I think that due to social media, especially, it has a very big immediate reinforcement. I mean, when they are sharing what they are doing, when they receive likes, comments, it's difficult to compete with the reinforcement from social media and to reduce the impact on traveling. I don't know if I'm responding to your question.
You're absolutely, that's exactly right. And it's particularly relevant when we're talking about, you know, the practitioners and how that's different as practitioners who also have like that intergenerational privilege, let's call it. And so I think that's a really, really interesting perspective. And I would, there's a question also that was asked around like, how would you see any thoughts around like normalizing talking about these types of feelings? The travel is so connected to identity. And so I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
How to talk about these type of feelings, you mean?
Yeah, when it comes to, you talked earlier about you know, holding on to stress and like being in a state of hyper vigilance and being able to like identify that in others and sort of normalize talking about that as a sector, because I think that that is so connected to our identity and students' identity. So wondering your thoughts around that. Just an easy question for you.
Yeah. Just an easy one, right? Exactly. I think that sometimes it's easier to make people experience it from themselves than just to talk about it. So I mean, it's difficult to, just to give you a little example of it. Last summer, I was in Canada, and it was very, very sad to see how some glaciers, they were reduced year by year. You know, you had different parts that you were seeing where the glacier was in 2000, 2006, and how it's changing. But obviously you cannot take your students and go to every place to make experience them that. But maybe we can do it. For example, a thing that I do a lot in workshops about eco-anxiety is to put them different pictures, different images of the environment, places in which they can see a lot of plastic, images in which they can see the problems with the sea, but also positive things. I mean, I think we need to combine both, you know, because if not, it can create this kind of stress. And when we are just talking about difficult emotions related to climate change and eco-anxiety, in some people, we can create a kind of avoidance, you know, a kind of, oh, this is too much. I don't want to see it, you know. And that's why I think that sometimes to share with them different images and just ask them, what emotion this image evoke in you, you know, what do you feel when you see this? But with things that maybe they are going to evocate difficult and also positive feelings, and later to begin to talk about it, to begin to talk about how these emotions, they are informative. But I would begin putting the image or the picture and asking them what they feel, and again combining positive and more difficult feelings, because it's going to create this kind of reinforcement as well, and it's going to reduce stress, and it's going to reduce the probabilities of avoidance.
And if possible, in a green space. Wonderful. Yeah, I was listening, I'm learning. So that's great. I also just wanted to share for people who will watch the recording in the future, that Kevin McGavin, who's joined, shared that from my experience, I think action is key with students to manage their anxiety. Getting students to do something helps a lot in dealing with eco stress, and that feeling that you're actively doing something, like no matter how small it is helpful. I don't know, Kevin, if you wanted to elaborate on that or share, feel free to unmute. But I think, Leticia, that aligns, I think, with a little bit of what you're kind of just talking about.
Yeah, hi CJ, Kevin here from France. Yeah, no, it's pretty much as written. My experience of teaching intercultural management and carbon literacy, or carbon eco-literacy, eco-literacy, excuse me, is that students, the anxiety is definitely there, but the fact that they can do something, or we give them the tools to do, no matter how small it is, the project, they get a sense of doing something, and that alleviates the stress. They get to me, it's the most efficient way of students dealing, having that sense of that they're actually accomplishing something, and you know, moving the dial on being active and alleviating the stress.
Thank you, Kevin. And I guess I mean, I have one more question. If anyone else has questions, like, please feel free. This is really great. I think this is an important conversation. And you mentioned earlier about awareness being such an important part of it. And now we're talking about positive feelings, and the reality of climate action is it sort of tends to be more often than not that sort of negative piece. And so when you're looking at awareness and positive feelings and negative truths, if you will, and because we are all, this is the, you know, Kenny, the Climate Action Network for international educators, what would you say as a key takeaway for people who are who want to talk about this more in the space that they are working? What would you suggest people do when they want to engage their colleagues who might not be as familiar in this work, or might not want to hear about it because it could be perceived as a threat, or it could seem negative? So for people, for international educators who want to take action, what would be sort of your key sort of takeaway for a to-do or an actionable sort of step?
Yeah, I think it's a very good question because sometimes it happens also to me that in some courses, for example, we don't know how to talk about this topic. We don't know how it could be part of our syllabus or things like that. And I think that there are things here that are key about it. One of them is to do it from an interdisciplinary point of view. Just to give you an example of it, for example, last semester for fall at Syracuse University in Madrid, we did an activity with Monica Perez Bedmar. I don't know if you know her, that she's a member of Kenny as well. That's why I'm here today, because of her. And yeah, and she had a wonderful idea. I think that it was that we created a kind of seminar, we created a kind of conference or event from different courses, but all of them related to the sustainable goals, you know, and all of them related to climate change from different courses. And for example, obviously I did it from psychology and eco-anxiety, she did it from the ocean, but also there were teachers or professors that they did it from Spanish. And I mean, and how, for example, the city of Madrid could be a more sustainable city, you know? So as students, they had to create things, they had to create presentations, posters. We were sharing from different areas of knowledge, and we were sharing from different fields. So I think this is just one idea, but these kind of things that trying to work together to communicate, because if we have students and just in one course that is maybe a course very related to climate change, we talk about it, we are going to see it like a separate thing. But if we can all connect, and if we can do it from an interdisciplinary point of view, it's going to be like a little rain, you know, that little by little is going to create that change. And I agree with Kevin as well, that is key to take action. I mean, when we're talking about creating awareness, regulating emotions, a thing that I say to not my students, but my clients in psychotherapy is that it's fine to create awareness, to regulate our emotions, but we also need to take action things, even if they are very little, because they are going to create this sense of progress and this sense of congruence, as I was telling you before. So communication, I mean collaboration from different courses, different professionals, and also collaboration that is encouraging to take action.
Those are, I think, some beautiful words to sort of leave us with. They're hitting all the the N in Canny with network, the action of Canny, the A in Canny. So I really think that there's some really great takeaways there for some folks who are watching in the future, who have attended today. And if there's anyone has any other question, please we'll stay for a few more minutes. But Leticia, thank you so much for this session. It was really wonderful. Thank you to University of Tasmania and Alethea for sponsoring, and for everyone for joining us, and all the volunteers who made this whole session and have made this week possible so far. So we'll stick around, but thank you for joining.
Thanks to you.